Working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands. We're working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. The Myanmar junta has reduced ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi's 33-year prison sentence by 6 years in a partial pardon that rights groups have condemned as a cynical ploy. And our breaking news tonight, Donald Trump's legal situation has taken a dramatic turn.
Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding.
As he faces a third indictment, this time a federal grand jury in Washington is investigating his alleged attempt to overturn the 2020 election results.
Our mutual objective is to officially resume the Philippines-EU FTA negotiations.
Trade and Industry Secretary Alfredo Pascual expressed the Department of Trade and Industry's determination to finalize the trade agreement negotiations between the Philippines and the EU before the end of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s administration.
This event is an opportunity to raise awareness on the challenges that member states, the UN, survivors, and all stakeholders face in combating trafficking.
And during a special event commemorating the 10th anniversary of the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, a top UN official highlighted the alarming reality of human trafficking, stating that it hides not just in the shadows, but in plain sight. And tonight, the Myanmar junta has reduced ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi's 33-year prison sentence by 6 years in a partial pardon that rights groups have condemned as a cynical ploy. Suu Kyi, who has been detained since the February 2021 coup, still faces 14 charges, including corruption and violating coronavirus restrictions. The junta's announcement on Tuesday was part of an amnesty of more than 7,000 prisoners, including 125 foreigners. An unspecified numbers of prisoners facing the death penalty also had their sentences commuted to life imprisonment. David Matheson, an independent analyst on Myanmar, said the partial pardon was a cynical ploy to tell the world that there might be some kind of political resolution coming, when we know that there is not. I think they are just playing cruel games with a political prisoner. All the charges against her are absurd, and having 6 years off 33 isn't mercy. Human Rights Watch's Asia Division Deputy Director Phil Robertson said the junta aimed to create the impression of moderation and dialogue when in fact there really is none on offer. Joe Freeman, a spokesman on Myanmar for Amnesty International, said the reductions show the arbitrary nature of the junta's military courts. Those swept up in its clutches never know what may happen to them. The junta announced on Monday it would extend a state of emergency by 6 months, which is likely to delay elections promised for August. In a recent palace briefing, the Department of Justice clarified that suspended Negros Oriental Representative Arnolfo Tevis Jr. cannot be labeled as a fugitive solely based on his designation as a terrorist by the Anti-Terrorism Council. According to DOJ spokesperson Assistant Secretary Mico Clavino, Tevis would only be considered a person running away from justice if a warrant of arrest is issued against him.
He is not considered a fugitive, as this is separate and distinct from a criminal action. It is only when you are issued a warrant of arrest that you become a fugitive or your status becomes a fugitive. Right now, he is designated as a terrorist, but that's as far as we go.
Clavino further explained that the terrorist designation of Tevis and his alleged armed group precedes the filing of charges, as it's purely an executive act. DOJ Undersecretary Nicolas Felix T. highlighted that the ATC is not mandated to provide Tevis and his group with an opportunity to be heard before being designated as terrorists.
Under the procedure laid down by law and by the implementing rules and regulation, we're not required to hear from the respondents when it comes to designation. That is not the case in preliminary investigation, where the respondents have a right to be heard.
Assistant Director General Jonathan Malaya from the National Security Council stated that the ATC's decision to designate Tevis and his group as terrorists was aimed at addressing the security threat they pose to the Filipino people, especially in Negros Oriental Province. Malaya cited evidence pointing to meticulously planned and executed killings in the region, indicating a pattern intended to spread fear and intimidation among its residents.
That the designation of Congressman Arnie Tevis and his armed group is not solely premised on the assassination of Governor Digamo. Rather, the killing of Governor Digamo and his supporters helped the Anti-Terrorism Council establish the pattern of violent activities that warrant his designation and that of his group as a terrorist organization. This designation is necessary to address the significant threat posed by the Tevis group to the security and well-being of our nation, especially those residing in Negros Oriental.
Meron po tayong higit 50 na affidavits na nagsasabi na takot sila at yung dahilan kung bakit ayaw gumalaw ng police ay dahil din sa takot. Although of course these are all written down as affidavits, it just goes to show that there really is that widespread fear and intimidation present in Negros Oriental. And ang sa amin lang naman ho, hindi ba, gusto ko lang balikan kung ano nangyari nung March 4, kung saan may 10 na namatay and 18 ang nasugatan. And this happened in broad daylight sa loob ng bahay ni Governor Digamo, kung saan nagbibigay siya ng ayuda para sa kanyang mga constituents. Tignan na lang natin yon, na gaano ka-brazen, gaano kasama yung ganong pangyayari. Kaya ang sinasabi lang ho namin, kung walang ebidensya, siguro matatakot kami kasi tinatawagan namin siyang terorista, walang basis. Pero ang ginawa ho namin, tinignan namin lahat ng anggulo dito. It would be the height of injustice kung sinabi namin ito na walang ebidensya. At alam ho namin yan. Alam namin kung gaano kabigat itong tag na to, na terorista. Kaya hindi namin basta-bastang gagawin yon. Ang ginawa ho namin, dumaan kami sa tamang proseso.
Trade and Industry Secretary Alfredo Pascual expressed the Department of Trade and Industry's determination to finalize the trade agreement negotiations between the Philippines and the European Union before the end of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s administration. Secretary Pascual highlighted the government's commitment to expediting the negotiations during a media briefing on the resumption of trade talks for a free trade agreement with the EU. He also mentioned that the Department of Trade and Industry will commence scoping discussions in September with the goal of completing them by the year end.
Well, we expect that these discussions will start with a scoping exercise. And our expectation is that we can commence this right after the usual summer holidays in Europe, maybe in early September, and hope to finish this scoping exercise before the end of this year.
Secretary Pascual emphasized that a successful free trade agreement with the EU could lead to increased investments and stronger economic cooperation between the two regions.
Of course, this FTA will also attract more investments from Europe, given that there will be preferential tariff arrangements for products that will be produced here. So European companies and other companies from the world, other parts of the world, will be attracted to set up their production facilities in the Philippines for purposes of tapping the export market in Europe, making use of our FTA. So that also would mean creation of job opportunities for our people.
The news comes after the EU and the Philippines announced their intention to explore the resumption of negotiations for an ambitious, modern, and balanced free trade agreement with a focus on sustainability.
Our mutual objective is to officially resume the Philippines-EU FTA negotiations at the most reasonable time, bolstering our economic cooperation for the benefit of our people. This endeavor is it's not just a priority of our government, but also strongly supported by the business sector, entities such as the German-Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the EU-ASEAN Business Council, and the European Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines. So the Philippines-EU FTA also serves as a platform for the EU's economic engagement with the Indo-Pacific region. A region that's becoming to be a focus globally from various regions in the world. And in this region, the Philippines can play a vital role as the EU's strategic partner. We recognize the significance of this opportunity and are committed to realizing its full potential.
And our breaking news segment tonight to the U.S., Mr. Donald Trump's legal situation has just taken a dramatic turn as he faces a third indictment. This time, a federal grand jury in Washington is investigating his alleged attempt to overturn the 2020 election results. Let's get into the details. Today, the former President Donald Trump was indicted by a federal grand jury in Washington. The indictment charges him with 3 counts of conspiracy and 1 count of obstruction, all related to his alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election results.
Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding.
In response, Mr. Trump has been summoned to appear before a federal magistrate judge in Washington on Thursday to address these charges. The indictment also references 6 unnamed and unindicted co-conspirators. According to the document, Mr. Trump and these co-conspirators knowingly used false claims of election fraud to pressure state legislators and election officials into subverting the legitimate election results. Moments ago, Special Counsel Jack Smith commented on the January 6th attack on the Capitol, labeling it an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy.
The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election.
The Trump campaign, in response, has again called the indictment a witch hunt and interference in the current presidential election, where Mr. Trump is the Republican frontrunner by a wide margin.
In the newest echelon poll of swing states, we're trouncing Biden by 7 points. If I weren't running, I would have nobody coming after me. Or if I was losing by a lot, I would have nobody coming after me.
The former president has lashed out at the special counsel, calling him deranged and accusing him of issuing yet another fake indictment to interfere with the presidential election. Mr. Trump questioned the timing of the indictment, asking why didn't they do this 2.5 years ago? He alleged that the timing was strategic and designed to disrupt his presidential campaign. On his Truth Social platform, Mr. Trump said, because they wanted to put it right in the middle of my campaign, prosecutorial misconduct. And today, credit rating agency Fitch downgraded the United States top-tier credit rating by 1 step citing concerns over the growing federal debt burden and an erosion of governance manifested in debt limit standoffs. The decision has elicited strong reactions from the White House, with Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre fiercely rejecting the move, stating that it defies reality. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said the move by Fitch to downgrade our credit rating is without merit and doesn't reflect the true state of our economy. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen also expressed her disagreement with Fitch, describing the change as arbitrary and based on outdated data. This marks the first time in over a decade that a major ratings company has downgraded the United States credit rating. In 2011, a debt ceiling impasse led S&P to lower Washington's AAA rating, sparking bipartisan outrage. Fitch explained its decision in a statement, saying the rating downgrade of the U.S. reflects the expected fiscal deterioration over the next 3 years, a high and growing general government debt burden, and the erosion of governance relative to peers. Despite the downgrade, Fitch has assigned a stable outlook to the U.S. The downgrade is a blow to the U.S.'s reputation as a safe and reliable borrower. It could also make it more expensive for the government to borrow money, which would have a negative impact on the economy. The Philippines has called on its ASEAN neighbors to consider national priorities in their community's post-2025 vision, with a particular emphasis on stability in the Indo-Pacific region, especially the South China Sea. The Department of Foreign Affairs revealed that the Philippines advocated for the inclusion of national priorities during the 9th meeting of the high-level task force on the ASEAN community's post-2025 vision, which took place from July 26 to the 27th in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. ASEAN's post-2025 vision aims to articulate the region's aspirations for the next 20 years upon its adoption in 2025, according to the DFA statement. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, is comprised of Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Now, the Philippines emphasized the need to address that threatens peace, security, and stability in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in the South China Sea. The country also urged ASEAN to continue responding to issues that affect the region, such as migration, climate change, and biodiversity loss. Additionally, the Philippines called on ASEAN to harness the potential of the creative economy to drive regional economic growth and prosperity. Meanwhile, Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo is set to embark on a 6-day trip to Vietnam and Laos. The visit aims to review Manila's relations with Hanoi and Vientiane and explore opportunities to further strengthen bilateral ties with these nations. Deputy Executive Secretary of the World Food Program, Carl Scow, issued a stark warning about the critical funding crisis the organization is facing, leading to the scaling back of life-saving assistance at a time when acute hunger is reaching unprecedented levels.
The largest food and nutrition crisis in history today persists. This year, 345 million people continue to be acutely food insecure, while hundreds of millions of people are at risk of worsening hunger. The causes of this food crisis are manifold: climate change and unrelenting disasters, and added pressure from persistent food price inflation and mounting debt stress amid an expected slowdown in the global economy. But conflict and insecurity remains a primary driver of acute hunger around the world. The impacts of armed conflict on food security can be direct, such as displacement from land, looting, or destruction of food stocks and agricultural assets. Indirect impact can include the disruption of food system and markets and decreases access to supplies necessary for food preparation, such as fuel and water. Many of the countries where WFP works are dramatic examples of the link between conflict and hunger. The collapse of the Black Sea Initiative is, of course, regrettable, to say the least. Under the initiative, WFP has shipped more than 725,000 tons of grain, relieving hunger in some of the hardest hit corners of the world, including Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, and Yemen. WFP relied on Ukraine, a competitively priced, accessible, and high-quality source of wheat. Despite the war, and thanks to this accord, Ukraine remained WFP's biggest supplier of wheat in 22, supplying more than half of WFP's wheat grain. Losing this source is now of great concern, of course.
Now, during a special event commemorating the 10th anniversary of the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, a top UN official highlighted the alarming reality of human trafficking, stating that it hides not just in the shadows, but in plain sight. On the occasion of the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, the UN convened a significant event in New York under the theme Reach Every Victim of Trafficking, Leave No One Behind, emphasizing the urgent need for a collaborative and inclusive approach to combat this heinous crime.
This event is an opportunity to raise awareness on the challenges that member states, the UN, survivors, and all stakeholders face in combating trafficking. This year specifically, we wish to emphasize that partnering with victims, survivors, and their organizations, and learning from their lived experiences are important for effective policymaking and strengthened implementation of the Global Plan of Action to combat trafficking in persons.
The UN's Executive Director of the Office on Drugs and Crime, Gada Fatiwali, delivered a compelling message, underscoring the gravity of the issue and the crucial role of partnerships and victim engagement in effective policy making.
Human trafficking is a crime that hides not just in the shadows, but in plain sight. Yet our responses are falling short, leaving many unprotected. According to data in UNODC's Global Report on Trafficking in Persons 2022, more than 50% of cases of human trafficking are brought forward by victims or their families, with authorities struggling to detect and protect trafficking victims. Those targeted are often the most vulnerable in society, left behind by poverty, conflict, and climate-related disasters. In search of a better life, victims become shackled by the false promises of traffickers. Women and girls, who account for around 60% of detected victims, are more likely to suffer sexual exploitation and higher levels of violence at the hands of their captors. While men and boys are being increasingly exploited for forced labor and criminal activities.
Melanie Thompson, Outreach and Advocacy Coordinator at the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, said that the only way to end human trafficking is to combat the demand for it.
And from the perspective of a survivor, I can say this. If we combat the demand that continues to exploit women and girls and marginalize people like myself, then we can begin to put an end to human trafficking. That is the only way forward. We must recognize that without the demand for trafficking, there would be no trafficking victims.
The event was co-organized by the permanent missions of the Philippines, Belarus, and the Dominican Republic to the UN in collaboration with the UN Office on Drugs and Crime and UN Women. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angela. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.